Sometimes the most heartfelt audio stories are born not from fiction, but from real life itself. This is a true story, about trust that can be easily broken and a truth that can turn everything upside down. Behind the facade of everyday life stories often lie family secrets, deception, and betrayal by loved ones. This emotional story is more than just a tale, it is a deep dive into life lessons, family conflicts, and secrets that have been kept silent for years. What if the person next to you is living a double life? What if a stranger's gaze helps you see what you never wanted to notice? This is an interesting story in the category of revenge stories, just like those on Reddit, audio stories of infidelity, where a husband's betrayal and family secrets become part of a dramatic finale. The ending of this life story will surprise you, but only if you listen until the end. And trust me, it's worth it. Well then, intrigued? Ready? Let's begin. Sometimes it seems that love does not disappear in an instant, but melts slowly, imperceptibly. Like ice in a glass of wine, at first it chills, then only water remains. That is exactly how I had been feeling next to David in recent months. He was silent more often, and looked into my eyes less and less. It was as if a wall had formed between us, thin but solid, and I could not understand how we got to this point. My name is Marina. I am originally from St. Petersburg, but I have been living in Chicago for 8 years now. Here I found myself, found my profession, friends, and once, love. David was the one who first showed me America from another side, warm, reliable, loving. He charmed me with his restraint, confidence, and calmness. We got married almost immediately after my move, it was all like in a movie. But now all of it felt foreign, as if it were a long-filmed episode. I work as an interior designer, I create comfort and beauty in other people's homes. But my own home had stopped feeling cozy. Our conversations with David became short, routine. He came home late, ate dinner in silence, went to bed first. I cooked his favorite meals, lit candles, wore the dress he once looked at me in without taking his eyes off me. But now he barely glanced. As if I had become part of the decor, nothing more. When he first said, "Andrew is coming for dinner, it's been a while," I felt a strange anxiety. Andrew, his best friend since college. I had heard about him, but never talked to him closely. And yet, in David's voice, there was something alive, something that had not been there for a long time. Maybe this evening would be a breath of fresh air? Maybe their meeting would awaken his former warmth? I decided that this might be a chance. A chance to feel like more than just a wife again, like a woman, desired and needed. I spent a long time choosing a dress, did my hair, applied makeup a bit more brightly. Even the music playing was not just background, it was part of my plan. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted him to see me. To finally really look at me. But when David came home from work, he gave me his usual glance, a little tired, a little distant. Not a word about how I looked. No smile. Only, "Andrew will be here in half an hour." I forced myself to smile. Everything was still ahead. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe everything could still be saved. I set the table carefully, as if it were not just dinner, but an attempt to bring the past back to life. The cutlery was perfectly aligned, the glasses chimed at the slightest touch. The room was filled with the scent of lavender and rosemary. I hoped it would remind David of our first evening together. And then, the doorbell rang. I went to open the door. And I didn't know then that from that moment, everything in my life would begin to change. That this dinner would not just be a meeting of old friends, but the beginning of something dangerous, forbidden, and frighteningly alluring. The door opened, and he walked in so confidently, as if he had been here hundreds of times. Andrew, tall, slender, with that very slight smirk that involuntarily takes a woman's breath away. He looked impeccable, dark trousers, a light shirt with the collar unbuttoned, and slightly tousled hair, as if he had just walked out of a salon, or someone's embrace. "You must be Marina," he said in a deep, enveloping voice and extended his hand. His palm was warm, confident. And in that moment, for the first time in a long while, I felt like a woman. not a wife, not a homemaker, not a designer. Just a woman, with a trembling inside, with sharp sparks of interest in my chest. "Nice to meet you," I replied, trying not to show how strangely his touch had affected me. David came out of the kitchen and gave a dry nod. "You're right on time." No warmth. No hug, no joy in the meeting. I had expected more. After all, they had been friends since college. But David was as cold as always. We sat down at the table. I poured wine, served appetizers, listened as they exchanged remarks about old stories, college, crazy parties, work. Andrew spoke easily, vividly, as if illuminating the space around him. And David kept drifting off, sinking into some inner detachment. But what struck me most were Andrew's eyes. He wasn't just looking at my face, he seemed to be studying me. Noticing details, earrings, the shade of my lipstick, the movement of my fingers on the stem of the wine glass. I felt uneasy, but at the same time, strangely pleased. I hadn't felt such a gaze in a long time. David had stopped looking at me like that years ago. The conversation turned to my work. "You're a designer?" "Interesting," Andrew said, and there was something in his voice beyond ordinary curiosity. He asked questions about projects, clients, inspiration. And David remained silent, as if all of this was foreign to him. And then, came a phrase that sent a chill down my spine. "You know, Marina, sometimes it seems to me that you know the least in this house," Andrew said with a light smile, as if joking. But I felt everything inside me tighten. I looked up and met his gaze. It was too direct. Too telling. I smiled back, stiffly, trying to hide my confusion. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Nothing, just thinking," he shrugged and took a sip of wine. "You know, some houses hold too many secrets in their walls." David abruptly stood up from the table. "I'll get another bottle of wine." His voice sounded rough. He went into the kitchen, leaving us alone. Silence hung for a few seconds. "You are truly a beautiful woman, Marina," Andrew suddenly said. Directly, calmly. As if it were a fact, not a compliment. I looked away. "Thank you," I whispered. But something dangerous had already begun to pulse inside me. Something that was only starting to take shape, and would soon break free. The wine was poured into the glasses, candles flickered with a soft glow, and the dish with baked salmon gave off an aroma that usually lifted David's mood. But not today. He sat with a strained smile, as if he were forced to attend this dinner against his will. Andrew, on the other hand, appeared relaxed and at ease. He knew how to lead a conversation, toss in remarks, laugh at the right moments, and at the same time, observe carefully. His eyes rested on me more and more often. And each such glance felt like an electric jolt, making my heart beat a little faster. "Remember that story in the dorm, Dave?" Andrew began with a grin. "When you hid under the bed to avoid that red-haired student?" David glanced at him and frowned. "Are you serious?" "That was 100 years ago." "Yeah, but things like that aren't forgotten." Andrew laughed. "You always knew how to get out of trouble. Even when things were about to explode." I smiled too, trying to support the light atmosphere. But there was something strange in Andrew's tone. As if behind every joke, there was a hint. Something unspoken, almost piercing. He continued, "Are you truly happy, David? I mean, right now. With all this, the house, the job, the marriage." His words sounded too direct. I tensed, looking at my husband. "What kind of question is that?" David replied sharply. "You've always had odd topics for dinner conversations." "I'm just curious. Because when a person is happy, they shine. But you, my friend, you've gone dim." Andrew looked at me, and in his gaze there was more than just friendly interest. It was as if he was inviting me to listen closely to those words. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. I didn't know what struck me more, the phrase itself, or the way Andrew said it. Then he suddenly turned to me. "And you, Marina? Are you happy with David?" The question caught me off guard. I straightened up and set the glass on the table so my fingers wouldn't betray their trembling. Of course, I answered, a little delayed. We just have a calm life. Calmness is good, he nodded. Sometimes even too much. He smiled again, but this smile was no longer playful. There was a hidden pain in it, a memory, maybe even jealousy. Or a premonition of a storm. His next phrase came almost casually, as if by accident. Some secrets stay hidden for too long, don't they, David? The air in the room seemed to thicken. David silently stood up and walked to the kitchen, under the pretense of getting more wine. His steps sounded heavy, tense. He clearly didn't want to continue the conversation. Left alone with Andrew, I felt a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. He looked at me, intently, calmly, without looking away. Sorry if I was blunt, he said quietly. Sometimes I just can't stay silent when I see lies. I didn't know what to say. All I felt at that moment was an inner whirlwind. As if my home, my relationship, my understanding of life, everything began to shift. And it all started with him. With this strange, handsome, overly observant man I barely even knew. But he, it seemed, knew far more than he was supposed to. David stayed in the kitchen longer than usual. I could hear him opening cabinets, moving glasses around, as if he was deliberately stalling. Perhaps he hoped that the awkwardness would vanish by the time he returned. But between Andrew and me, a different atmosphere had already formed, strange, cautiously magnetic. I could feel his eyes on me. And it wasn't just a look, it was a silence filled with meaning, a pause that couldn't be ignored. You are a beautiful woman, Marina, he said again, and this time it didn't sound like a compliment, but a statement. Calm, confident. I flinched slightly. That is rarely said to a married woman in her own home. But my husband wasn't in the room at that moment. I tried to look away, but for some reason, I couldn't. I looked into his eyes, and they seemed too attentive. As if he saw right through me. Not the version of me that I presented to the world, smiling, neat, composed. But the real one, tired, unloved, confused. Why are you saying this? I whispered. Because the truth shouldn't stay on the tip of the tongue for too long, he answered quietly. You know, Marina, there are things you need to know. About David. About the past. About what you call life. I felt a chill run down my skin. He spoke calmly, but every word cut thin and deep. What do you mean? I asked, feeling my heart start to beat faster. He just shook his head and looked away. It's too soon. But you'll feel it yourself. Very soon. I didn't have time to ask anything else. David returned with a bottle of wine and a forced smile on his face. His eyes darted from me to Andrew, and for a moment, I caught something uneasy. Jealousy? Suspicion? Or fear that he had said too much? Dinner continued, but it no longer felt like we were simply eating and talking. It felt like a game. Where one made a move, with a phrase, a glance, a hint. And the other, tried not to lose. When it was over and Andrew stood to leave, I walked him to the door. David stayed in the kitchen, busying himself with the dishes. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, Andrew said, already standing in the hallway. But sometimes people need to be shaken up. Especially when silence has reigned around them for too long. I remained silent. But inside, everything was buzzing with questions. He took my hand, for just a moment, but that brief gesture felt too personal. His fingers were warm, his gaze, confident. Too confident. You deserve more, Marina, he said before stepping out the door. When I returned to the living room, David was sitting on the couch, staring at the TV screen, where some news report was playing. He didn't even turn toward me. I sat down beside him, but it felt like a chasm lay between us. For the first time, I felt that there was another person who truly saw me. Who spoke to me, not just near me. And it wasn't my husband. But what exactly did Andrew mean? What was he trying to tell me? Why did his words sound as if I were living someone else's life? I didn't yet know that the answers would be painful. That they would shatter my idea of love, trust, and marriage. But that night, I fell asleep with the feeling that something was falling apart. And with a secret hope that someone else might be able to save it. After that tense dinner with Andrew, his hints kept haunting me. David was becoming more and more distant, and I felt the chasm between us growing deeper. One morning, after David had left for work, I received a message from Andrew. "We need to talk. It's important." We met at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Andrew was sitting at a corner table, his face serious. I sat across from him, feeling my heart tighten with a heavy sense of foreboding. "Marina," he began, looking me straight in the eyes, "I've thought for a long time about whether I should tell you, but you deserve to know the truth about David." I froze, clenching my hands into fists under the table. "He's living a double life," Andrew continued. "He has another woman, and they recently had a child." The world around me seemed to collapse. I felt the blood drain from my face, and a chill spread through my chest. "Are you sure?" My voice trembled. Andrew nodded and placed a piece of paper with an address on the table. "This is the place where they meet. I can take you there if you want." A storm of emotions raged inside me: pain, anger, betrayal. But more than anything, I wanted to see it with my own eyes. "Take me there," I said firmly. We drove up to a small house in a quiet neighborhood. My heart pounded so hard it felt like its rhythm could be heard throughout the car. Andrew looked at me with sympathy. "I'll wait here." I nodded and, taking a deep breath, stepped out of the car. Approaching the window, I peeked inside. A soft light filled the room. I saw David holding a baby in his arms, and beside him stood a woman gently touching his shoulder. They were laughing, looking like a happy family. At that moment, something inside me broke. I stepped away from the window, feeling the tears stream down my cheeks. When I returned to the car, I sat in the passenger seat and covered my face with my hands. "I saw them," I whispered through the tears. Andrew placed his hand on my shoulder, his touch warm and comforting. "I'm sorry, Marina. You don't deserve this." I looked up at him, my eyes full of pain and questions. Why didn't he leave me? Why does he still live with me if he has another family? Andrew looked away, then turned back to me. "Because your money pays for everything, the house, the bills, the cars. Even this apartment for his mistress." Andrew's words felt like a knife to the heart. I felt used, deceived, emptied. In tears and despair, I leaned into Andrew, and he wrapped his arms around me, letting me feel that I wasn't alone in this pain. After Andrew's revelations and what I had seen with my own eyes, I returned home feeling like an empty shell. The world I had spent years building collapsed in a single day. David had not yet come back, and I used the moment to gather proof of his betrayal. I started with his office. In one of the desk drawers, I found bank statements and receipts for large sums of money spent in places I knew nothing about. Some of them were linked to the address of the apartment where I had seen him with the other woman and their child. With each new discovery, my heart clenched with pain. Then I took his phone, which he had left charging. I had never before allowed myself to invade his privacy, but now the boundaries were erased. In his messages, I found a conversation with a woman named Laura. Words of love, discussions about their child, plans for the future, all of it confirmed my worst fears. When David returned home, I was sitting in the living room, surrounded by all this evidence. He walked in with a smile, but as soon as he saw my face and the scattered papers, his expression changed. "What's going on, Marina?" he asked, trying to stay calm. I looked up at him, my eyes filled with tears and rage. "Can you explain this?" I pointed to the papers and his phone. David turned pale but tried to pull himself together. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I interrupted, my voice trembling with emotion. "You're living a double life, you have another woman and a child. And you're using my money to support them." He lowered his head, unable to find the words. "Why, David? Why did you do this to me?" He sat down across from me, avoiding my gaze. I didn't mean to hurt you. It started by accident, I didn't plan it. But then, I got lost in it. Lost? I scoffed bitterly. You lied to me every day, came home to our house, slept in our bed, knowing that in another apartment, your other family was waiting for you. He remained silent, and I felt the pain and fury boiling inside me. You never intended to leave me, because it's convenient for you to live off of me, isn't it? David looked up, his eyes filled with shame. I'm sorry, Marina. I made a terrible mistake. Tears ran down my cheeks, but I wasn't going to show weakness. Mistake? This is not a mistake, David. This is betrayal. I stood up, gathering the papers. I want you to leave. Today. He tried to argue, but I raised my hand to stop him. No. No more excuses. Leave. David stood, head lowered, and walked toward the door. When it closed behind him, I felt my strength leave me. I sank to the floor, sobbing, finally allowing myself to release all the pain. At that moment, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, I saw Andrew. His eyes reflected concern and sympathy. I thought you might need some support, he said softly. Without saying a word, I stepped forward and embraced him, finding comfort in his strong arms. The tears began to flow again, but now I knew I wasn't alone. My heart ached from the betrayal, my mind raced between anger and pain. Just then, the door gently opened, and Andrew came in. His eyes were filled with concern and compassion. He didn't say anything unnecessary, he just came over and sat next to me, wrapping his arms around me. In his embrace, I felt warmth and support that had been missing for so long. You're not alone, Marina, he whispered. I'm here. Tears streamed down my cheeks again, but this time they weren't as bitter. I allowed myself to relax in his arms, feeling the pain slowly begin to fade. We sat like that for a long time until I finally felt I could speak. I told Andrew about my feelings, about the pain of betrayal, about the fear of the future. He listened attentively, without interrupting, simply holding my hand. You are a strong woman, Marina, he said when I finished. And you will get through this. But don't be afraid to lean on those who care about you. I looked into his eyes and saw sincerity and care. At that moment, something new was born between us, something I had never known before. Andrew smiled. I'm here for you, Marina. Always. I nodded, feeling a new strength awaken in my chest. David's betrayal left a deep scar, but beside me stood a man who was ready to help heal those wounds. Ahead of me lay a new path, full of uncertainty, but now I knew I wouldn't walk it alone. After David left, leaving me in the ruins of our relationship, I realized I couldn't let him walk away unpunished. He had not only betrayed me emotionally, but also used my financial resources to support his mistress and their child. I decided I had to restore justice and reclaim control over my life. A few days later, once my emotions had settled a bit, I dialed David's number. He didn't answer right away, but eventually picked up. Marina, I'm glad you called. We need to talk. Yes, David, we really do need to discuss how we're going to move forward from this situation. We agreed to meet the next day at the cafe where we had once celebrated our anniversary. Meeting in such a place felt ironic, but I wanted to remind him of what he had destroyed. The next day, I arrived early and chose a table in the corner. David showed up on time, looking tired and defeated. He sat across from me, avoiding my eyes. Marina, I know I hurt you. I want to make things right. Make things right? I scoffed bitterly. Do you even realize you destroyed our family and used me? I was foolish and selfish. But I don't want to lose you. You've already lost me, David. The only thing left to discuss is how we're going to separate our finances. He sighed, realizing this conversation would not be easy. What do you suggest? First, I'm cutting off all your expenses, including the apartment for your mistress and the loans you took out. But I won't be able to handle those debts on my own. That's not my problem, David. You made your choice. He looked stunned, but didn't argue. Second, I'm filing for divorce and demanding a division of property. Marina, let's settle everything peacefully. Without court. Peacefully? After everything you've done? I'm not sure you deserve that. He lowered his head, acknowledging his guilt. I understand. But please, think about our past. I have thought about it, David. And I've come to the conclusion that you didn't just betray me, you betrayed everything we had. We fell silent, each lost in our own thoughts. I'll contact you through a lawyer, I said, standing up. I hope you understand the consequences of your actions. David nodded without looking up. As I left the cafe, I felt a sense of relief. It was the first step toward restoring justice and taking back control of my life. The legal proceedings lasted for several months. David tried to challenge my claims, but the evidence of his infidelity and financial manipulation was undeniable. The court ruled that the jointly acquired property, including the house and the cars, would remain with me, and all the loans taken out in his name were his sole responsibility to repay. After the court's decision, I decided to meet with David one last time to put a final end to everything. We met in the park where we once loved to take walks. He looked older and worn out. Marina, I understand that I deserve this. But it's hard for me to cope with the debts. David, you made your choice, and now you must take responsibility for it. I lost everything, you, our family, my stability. Maybe this is the lesson that will teach you to appreciate what you once had. He nodded in agreement. I hope you find the strength to start over, I added. Thank you, Marina. And I'm sorry. I forgive you. But I will never forget. We said goodbye, and I walked away, feeling the weight of the past slowly lifting from my shoulders. Ahead of me was a new life, free from lies and betrayal. Well, that's the end of this story. Now it's your turn to speak. Did you enjoy this story? If yes, give it a like, it's the best way to support our channel. And what do you think, did the main character act the right way? Was she too soft, or maybe too harsh? Share your thoughts in the comments, we truly want to hear what you think. Can betrayal ever be justified? Or is lying in a relationship always the point of no return? Your stories, your opinions, they matter. Because real life lessons are born from stories like these. If you want more interesting, emotional, and true audio stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss anything. Thank you for being with us. See you soon, there are many more powerful stories ahead, and each one will make you think.